Hey.
Oh my god. We need to get out of here right now.
It's just some kid. I thought it was somebody from work. Hey!
Brent, get in the car!
Whoa! Writer-director Dorothy Borain gives us Wake the Witch, which is also known as Awaken the Witch. And this is a low-budget 2010 movie, almost an amateurish production, I'd say. And the story is thus. We have these three young girls that are out in the woods doing some type of fashion shoot for one of their kind of college projects. And they discover there's these kind of chains that seem to lead somewhere. And they kind of liken this to this urban legend of the area about this witch which was hung because she had allegedly had killed all these kind of children and was buried and kind of chained within these woods. And there's this kind of, this kind of legend goes that if you do this particular kind of procedure, the witch will tell you your future, that kind of stuff. And of course they discover maybe this is, there's something to this story, but it may be a bigger mystery, something to do with a strange plague that maybe has kind of plagued the area, excuse the pun, some years previously. Now what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let us discuss what I think works in this movie. So again, this is a very low budget film, and I'm not sure it was a really kind of professionally kind of put together. I think the budget was probably around $10,000 as far as I can see. So pretty low. But I will say our lead actress here is actually quite strong. In actual fact, there are some other performances. I think the brother's quite strong for the most part, and there are some reasonable performances through the movie, surprisingly enough. So, and even kind of what I would say some of the weaker ones aren't necessarily terrible. So I think everyone here actually does a reasonable job in regards to the kind of the acting, and the lead actress fairly good in that kind of respect. I mean, with the kind of like the caveat that this is a low budget B movie, but still I actually think the acting here is of a better quality than I've seen in budgets 10 times as kind of much. The idea of the story is actually reasonably solid. It's less of a film about supernatural witches, or there is a kind of supernatural element in it, and more about this strange kind of illness and how it's kind of affecting people and the history that is kind of involved there. So there is some elements I think that are pretty interesting. It doesn't really play like a pandemic movie. We get plenty of them in these days because of the coronavirus, but this is a 2010 movie. So it's kind of like, it plays a little differently. But it was a good idea, I think. And I've got to say, I think the actual movie starts fairly well. It's got a relatively kind of a strong start. You think it's going to be this kind of like this witch coming to kind of menace these girls and stuff like that, but it's not really. There is, a supernatural element involved, but it's less about a kind of a witch coming from the grave and things like that. There are some kind of, I suppose, flourishes in regards to, considering the budget, the directorial style here, and there are some attempts to have a little bit of mystery here and there as well. But let me now transition to what I think does not work. The major issue for me is the pacing of this film, and there's two things I would say in regards to that. Number one, it is way too long. It's nearly 2 hours long. And a film like this needs to be at most 90 minutes. But I would say this would have been better off, around an 80-minute mark, because it just drags out. So way too long. And to be honest with you, there's not a huge amount of plot. I mean, realistically, the bulk of the running time is this girl running to the woods, running back to the woods into the house, running from the house to another house, running to the house to the back into the woods, things like this. A couple of conversations on the way. That's pretty much a movie. And it's not particularly interesting, if we're being honest. This movie doesn't have much in the way of strong visuals. There's very little kind of VFX, scares, anything. So we have a good idea with a plot, which is then stretched out to a unfortunately quite a dull narrative, which is, you know, the narrative here is way too long, and I see this quite a lot in low budget indie movies. There's just no one to push back on the creativity of the director here. They want it their way because it's their vision, but there's no one to kind of say, let's talk about this, let's kind of like, you know, look at it from an outsider's perspective. You're totally invested in this project because it's your thing, but this is why you need producers on films ultimately. So it's too long, and then, as I've kind of alluded to, there's lots of scenes here that are unnecessarily dragged out, because ultimately there's not a huge amount that happens on screen. I mean, you know, there's girls that go missing, things like this, the police don't believe her, etc, etc. So there are some elements here that, you know, are essential scenes, but there's also a lot of padding, and we get a lot of kind of like long takes on sequences that just don't need to be there, don't need to be as long. Some sequences can be completely exercised, and this would have made a much more punchier film, and, you know, and it really helped the narrative. But let's talk about that narrative, because along with the pacing, I think the other issue here is the narrative is quite confused, because we don't really know what we're kind of watching. I think the movie is assuming that you are invested into this as much as maybe this writer-director is, and it just kind of has these kind of like, you know, it tries to take you on this journey without really kind of setting the groundwork, I think. And you're thinking, I don't really understand what's happening. Who are these people in the hoods and things like this? And, you know, why is this happening now? It doesn't seem to have anything to do with this kind of like this, these girls kind of like finding this chain and all this. Doesn't really seem to have anything to do with that. So it's kind of like the narrative here is a little muddled, a little bit convoluted and somewhat kind of hard to follow. And then let's talk about the ending. This is where we have an attempt at some type of VFX. There's a kind of a spider motif for some reason that doesn't pay off to anything. There's lots of webs everywhere. And then we have a really kind of like poor sequence with this kind of portal. I mean, there's choices here that could have gone a little differently. Let me just put it like that. I think the movie had some good ideas here, but the execution and what it was done with it, past the kind of, I think the basic synopsis, is quite poor. I mean, I'll give this movie a 3 out of 10, and that's mainly, I think, actually for some reasonable acting and at least a solid synopsis. The idea in its fullest, you know, form is not strong, but the kind of the seed of the idea is there. But it's a 3 out of 10. It's a weak movie, to be honest. It's quite dull, uninteresting, and it's executed, unfortunately, in a sort of somewhat humdrum and dull manner. So yeah, my thoughts are this lady, the writer-director needs producers and needs to basically listen to feedback, is what I would suggest. 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.